yeah, so for the next few minutes, I'll talk about some work that we did a couple of years ago, looking at Belize's managed access program. And then towards the end, I'll talk about how my research group is hoping to build on this work later this year and next year. And so I think it's common knowledge for many of us on this call and across the region, the coastal communities are facing increased risks from complex changes. This includes coastal erosion in Belize. This includes the destruction of marine coral reef habitats. And it also includes dredging, which together has some devastating effects, not only on communities, but also the habitats that support important fish species. At the same time, though, these vulnerabilities and shocks in small-scale fisheries are increasing, and as a note, these shocks are not mutually exclusive, which means that they're not occurring by themselves, but they're often occurring in conjunction with other shocks. So we're not just having overfishing, and then that is all that we're focusing on. Overfishing is usually occurring at the same time as a natural disaster, as an environmental catastrophe. Importantly, these shocks and vulnerabilities also occur at similar scales, right? So we're thinking temporal scale as well as spatial scales. They occur over time, and they're often occurring in the same space. And so many countries in the Caribbean have been trying to put into place measures as a way to combat and respond and build resilience to these shocks. And so Belize is one of those countries that try to shift to a rights-based fisheries management approach as a way to respond to what they noted and cited as being this decline in their fisheries stock and this destruction of their fisheries habitat. And so previously, Belize was classified, or their fisheries management was classified as being an open access system, right? So this means that fishers could fish wherever they wanted in Belize, except for marine protected areas, marine reserves, and no-take zones. So you can fish wherever you wanted across the country of Belize. However, Belize shifted to this rights-based fisheries system approach, which limited or restricted or allowed some rights for fishers, right? So previously, you could fish wherever you wanted with some restrictions, obviously. And then now, Belize shifted to this rights-based approach where fishers were allocated two of these areas, as you're seeing on your screen. Fishers are allocated two of these areas, and those are the areas that they are allowed to fish. So you see that this is a very drastic difference in comparison to what fishers were used to before. And so just driving home a few points here on this system. So the transition from what was declared as an open access system to a rights-based system. So fishers, again, you select those two sites. Those two sites are your sites to fish. And so this system was piloted in 2016, and a national rollout occurred in 2018. And with the introduction of this new rights-based approach, the 9 fishing zones were created. You're only seeing 8 on your screen on this map here, and that is because the 9th zone was declared as being deep sea fishing. And one of the central goals of this program, according to the government of Belize, was that it was promoted to be able to foster stewardship and ownership. And so what those words mean is that the idea was that fishers, because you had these two areas, fishers would be able to develop this idea, this is their backyard, right? And so they would protect it and put into place sustainable practices as a way to ensure that they have fish stock for the future and that the habitats were being monitored. And so what my work tried to look at was to look at this in two main components. One, I wanted to look at the policy around this new fisheries management perspective, but most importantly, I wanted to look at stakeholder perspectives. What were stakeholders thinking about this transition, and how were they incorporating the new regulations from this rights-based approach into what they already know about how they fish in Belize. And so so when we looked at the policy, we conducted a policy analysis. I won't go into too much details on this, but we have a paper on this. But what we found in that policy analysis was that the rights-based fisheries management approach in Belize, called managed access, was simply a repackaging of existing management regulations that Belize already had on their books, right? So fishers already had traditional fishing areas, and the reporting requirements were already in Belize's fisheries regulations, but they were largely unenforced. And so what our analysis suggested was that managed access was simply a repackaging of existing regulations. And now to look at stakeholder perspectives, what we did was using a mental model approach. And so this is getting very theoretical, so I will briefly rush over this, but I'm happy to talk with folks offline about any of these ideas. So mental models are simply how we navigate the world, right? So all of us on this call have a mental model for how we approach the world. These mental models influence our behavior, they influence our decisions. And so why we chose a mental model approach is because mental models, variation in how we see a system and how we operate in a system, influences how we will interact with a policy, and it influences policy design and implementation. At the same time, by pulling out someone's mental models or how they think about a system, it allows us to identify very easily, and I'll show you in a couple of slides, mutual areas of understanding. It also allows us to identify potential areas of conflict, and then we can pull together those as a way to develop interventions to be modified, so that we can develop policies that adhere to how people think about a system. And so, so your mental models, again, very briefly here, contains your knowledge, so what you know about a system. And so importantly, a point that I want to stress is that your mental models do not need to be right. So factually, your mental models don't need to be right. It's just how you view the system and how you view the world around you. So no one can tell you that your mental model is right or wrong. It is just how you think about the system. And so you have the content here, and you have the structure, which is how you organize those knowledge that you have. And so we wanted to look at how experience influences how folks think about the Belize's managed access system and what that looks like. So we had a very small sample size. I am rushing a little bit just in the event of time. A small sample size, which is common for these types of studies. We had about 75, 79 participants, and you'll see them on your screen. Some of those persons were pilot program fishers, so these folks participated in the initial phase of the introduction of the system, of the project. We had our non-pilot program fishers who came in after the project was rolled out, and we also had policymakers, which included representatives from the government, but also non-governmental organizations who played a major part in the implementation of these policies. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I will skip through a couple of these and look at this. So this is looking at how policymakers and pilot program fishers viewed the program. And so what you can see on your screen, cluster 4, that is how our pilot program fishers organize that cluster. But what you'll notice here is that the policymakers actually split that cluster into 3 others. And this is important for us because it demonstrates that those pilot program fishers and policymakers were not on the same page in how they were thinking about managed access. And that is significant because if both groups are not on the same page, we won't agree on how best to put into place management actions. We did the same thing with some other clusters. We see the one cluster, our pilot program fishers had those concepts together, and our policymakers split them. Again, importantly, if we're not on the same page, we can't adhere to regulations. So lastly, as I wrap up, some theoretical considerations is that experience may have varied impacts on our mental models and our mental structure, but on an applied level, tapping into how folks think about a system and how they organize a system may be important when we think about long-term fisheries policy execution and perceived legitimacy of when we put policies in place. And importantly, if we have this myopic view of policy design and implementation, it may affect short-term and longer-term sustainability. So we want to be able to see how folks think about a system, how they organize the system, what they know about the system before we put in place regulations which may not match how people think about the system. And so with that, I'll take any questions if we have time, but I'm happy to also chat offline about any of this work. Thank you very much.
All right, you're welcome, and thank you too, Dr. Wade. Nice philosophical presentation, different approach to management. Or I can only take one question. Well, Sandra Grant, you can go ahead. The other questions, please place them in the chat. Thank you.
Hi, thanks again. Thanks, Eric, for that presentation. And I think it goes to the heart of what Lester, Mr. Kong has been saying. The consultative process with fishermen is very, very, very important. And I think one of the things that we have to bear in mind is the language that we use when we are talking to ensure that we convey the right message to the fisherman, the message to the policymakers, and the message to the fisherman that is going to be different. And preparation for consultation and communication is very key and important to the process. I know under the managed access process, we did quite a bit of work in terms of at the beginning of the process going into communities and literally teaching them about the process. So there was a lot of consultation. This wasn't an easy process. This was years and years of consultation with the community, with the policymakers, with academia and other institutions. But yet, as Eric presented, is that the concept didn't go over as we thought. The outcome wasn't as we had expected, and we had thought that everybody was on the same page. So thanks again, Eric, for this. It's a caution for us. When we go into community, what we say, how we say, and how people interpret what we do and say is very important. Thank you.
Wonderful point. Thank you so much. And thanks again, Dr. Wade.